Okay, so I'm going to talk about chapter 5 of my book, Delivering the Impossible. And chapter 5 is called Chapter Bet, Everything is a Bet. And this is a relatively recent chapter that I've added to the book. And I haven't talked about it much before, so this could be quite interesting. I wrote an outline for this chapter, for a detailed outline that I'm going to submit as part of I'm going to submit as a publisher's letter, and it went pretty well. I must warn you now that there's some swearing in today's talk, so if you don't like swearing, miss this one out, or if you really want to hear it without the swearing, I can do a bleeped version maybe. Anyway, so all projects are inherently risky. If you think about it, if it wasn't a risky thing, it probably wouldn't be getting so many resources thrown at it. There'd probably be a low risk, low cost way of doing this thing. And the reason that the organisation is prepared to take these risks is because there's a perceived benefit. So the idea is that even though there are these risks and there is this expense and you have to go the trouble of kind of funding a project, there are some perceived benefits that will come from this that are worth taking the risk and the benefits. So all projects are gambles, but a lot of people, and especially a lot of big, serious organisations, don't want to look like they're gambling. And so there's a lot of what I would call project management theatre around projects to try to make them look like they aren't gambles, like they aren't risky, like there isn't a chance of failure. We know from the statistics, and you might argue with the statistics, but there's quite a lot of statistics around, and they've been around for a long time, that a substantial percentage of software development projects don't deliver what they're expected to deliver, or just fail completely, or just cancelled, right? So if that's the background, if that's the form for projects, for software development projects, then of course some of the projects that people are going to fund aren't going to succeed or aren't going to deliver as much value as was expected. That's the history, that's the kind of known history for these kinds of projects. What do I mean when I talk about project management theatre? Well, I put in my notes here, loudly and explicitly adopting a methodology. So this is kind of one of the things that happens with Agile is if we adopt this methodology, if we follow this methodology really strictly, then we're somehow guaranteed to success. We're kind of de-risking the project completely by using one of these methodologies. Now, I don't want to argue against these methodologies. I think if you use some kind of Agile methodology like Scrum or Lean, you probably are de-risking the project to some degree, but you're not completely de-risking it. There's still going to be a substantial amount of risk, which is related to all the other aspects of what's going on in the project. What else? Gate reviews is another notional idea of de-risking projects. That if at certain points you stop and say, where are we? Should we continue? This is kind of a theatrical way of showing that you're kind of being careful about the risks. Actually, I used to completely hate gate reviews, but having been involved in them more inside the GDS software development framework, which is pushed on the UK government, I don't hate them so much because I think there is kind of benefit here, and there is some genuine risk reduction, which is at each of those stages you can say, should we stop or should we carry on? And of course, if you stop, then you stop costing the organisation so much. If you can genuinely present an option of stopping, then I don't think that's such a bad thing. Spending lots of money on coaching, I've put as well. So kind of like the way that we're going to de-risk these projects is by spending an absolute fortune on making everybody completely agile. Really? I'm not sure there's that strong a connection between agile coaching and the success of projects. I think there are probably a whole bunch of other things that you could do, but what those other things are probably unique to the pathology of your organisation and would probably involve having to be honest about what the pathologies of your organisation are, what's wrong with your organisation, exactly what kind of unhappy family your organisation is. And a lot of organisations don't want to do that, so they just think, okay, we'll bring in lots of people who kind of know about agileness, and they'll stuff everything with agileness, and that'll really make things successful. So now I want to talk about 3 things that are kind of related to the idea of projects being bets. One is bounded rationality. The second, this is, I warned you about the swearing, is called fuck it. And the third is heads I win, tails you lose. So by bounded rationality, this is a concept that I think was kind of certainly suggested and promoted by a chap called Herb Simon, who was an economist and won a Nobel Prize. And his idea was that the reality of the world is that it's so complicated that when you're trying to kind of reason about any kind of reasonably complicated decision, at some point you're just going to have to stop. You can't you can't reason through all the different possibilities, all the things that might happen around any kind of thing that you're going to do in the future, any kind of thing that you're thinking about. At some point you just have to think, that's enough. We've gone as far as we possibly can with this. And we're just going to have to make a decision. We're just going to have to do something. And that point at which you kind of say, you know what? We've done quite a lot of investigation. But now we're going to do something. We're going to stop worrying about it. We're going to do something. That point is the fuck it point. Now, before I move on, I want to say it is a reasonably good idea to do some investigation before you start doing a project. But you should probably time box and resource restrict that investigation. And also at the end of that investigation, give yourself a chance of saying, you remember I was saying about gate reviews, give yourself a chance of saying yes or no. Because if you don't do that, if you don't time restrict and resource restrict this investigation and don't give yourself a chance of saying yes or no at the end of it, you can end up in what is called analysis paralysis. You can carry on doing analysis forever and ever and ever. And that can cost an absolute fortune. I've worked on projects where that process has taken millions and millions of pounds, and they had no real strategy, no function that they could use to figure out when they'd done enough analysis and when they needed to stop. And in fact, it turned out that analysis was resource time boxed in that kind of when about £6 million ran out, then they stopped because that was the budget for analysis. But I would advise that kind of probably less than that is a good idea. For whatever project that you're working on, roughly however big it is, maybe about 10% of the budget wouldn't be a bad amount of money and time, 10% of the time, 10% of the budget to kind of invest in doing some kind of discovery to see whether it works or not. So yes, as I said, like at some point we get to the point where we have to bound our rationality, and that point is where we say fuck it. We just say we're not going to worry so much about counting all the risks anymore. We're just going to start to do something. So at some point somebody says this, somebody says the F word, and the thing starts. And this is the interesting thing, is I've written here, the people who are most likely to say fuck it and take the risk aren't the people who have the best and most detailed understanding of the risks on a project. They're the people who think that they can benefit from the project. And one reason that people think they can benefit from the project is because either intuitively or explicitly they're adopting a strategy of and this is something that I take from a guy called Venkatesh Rao, who wrote several books, one of which is called the Gervais Principle. He talks about this thing called heads I win, tails you lose. And what this means is that if you have a certain kind of attitude towards these risk-taking projects, you can be certain that you will do okay, even if those projects don't do okay. So what do I mean by heads I win, tails you lose? What this means is that kind of basically if a project is going well, you associate yourself with this project. And if a project isn't going well, you are nowhere to be found. You stay away, and there is no record that you were ever involved in it. Now, this might seem extremely cynical, but somebody at some point has to take some bets. And if the punishment for taking bets is that they're essentially strapped to the mast of the project and have to fail with the project, then people are less likely to take bets. And if people are less likely to take bets, then it's less likely that any of those bets will be successful. So heads I win, tails you lose. I mean, when I've seen people doing this in the past, I thought this was like terrible, unethical behavior. But now I sort of realize, well, like, what contribution did they give to this project? Somehow they got this kicked off at the beginning. And that's actually a very valuable thing, because now we're all doing this thing where, they've taken a bet. And the chance might be, my job now as project manager on this project is to try and make that bet pay off. But there is something else that's interesting about this whole heads I win, tails you lose strategy, which is that the kind of people who want to have lots of projects going on that are relatively risky because they know they can attach themselves to the ones that go well and detach themselves from the ones that don't go well, are exactly the kind of people who are going to overstate the benefits of potential projects and understate the risks and costs of those potential projects. So this sheds light on the thing that I was just talking about 5 minutes ago, which is why so many projects fail. Yes, lots and lots of projects don't deliver the value that they were expected to deliver. Cost way more than they were expected to cost. Take more time than they were expected to cost. But those expectations of cost, were they honest expectations of cost? Or were they the kinds of expectations of cost that could be manipulated by the kind of people who want to make sure that there are lots of projects happening? Now, you might see, look, this is a chapter, if you've been following what I'm talking about, you might say, look, this is a chapter in this book that's supposed to be a positive way of seeing things. How on earth can this whole idea of everything being a bet, everything being inherently uncertain, these people who kind of kick projects off by overemphasizing how easy they're going to be and how valuable they're going to be, and de-emphasizing how risky they're going to be and how expensive they're going to be. How can this be a positive way of seeing projects? Well, if all projects are inherently risky, and all projects are inherently risky, don't you think it's better if you know that? For your mental well-being, do you not think it's better if you know that and you realise that all projects are inherently risky? If all projects are likely to have their benefits overstated and their costs and time duration and risks understated, you don't think it's better to know that? If you're the kind of person who actually takes responsibility for projects and feels it hard when projects have problems, etc., do you not think it's useful to bear in mind these things about what the dynamic is that's resulting in projects being failing, in inverted commas? Would they have failed if everybody had been absolutely brutally honest about what the costs and risks and benefit and potential benefits were? Maybe not. So another thing is, and this is very relevant to something else that we've been talking about when we were talking about the two streams, the idea stream and the delivery stream, is it's good to know that kind of part of the battle that you're going to have when you find issues with a project are that the people who are responsible for it are going to try and stay out of the way. They might not always be completely successful. In fact, that's part of the game. And the bit that I didn't get to in this list that I'm making, that I need to write tomorrow, is what are the practical actions, what are the things that you can do as a project manager knowing this. So I've told you that projects are a bet, that there are certain people who want to kick off lots of bets because they think they can benefit from them. And in the nature of doing that, they will understate the risks and they will overstate the potential benefits. What can you do about this if you're a project manager? Well, part of what you're trying to do is, like, back to kind of what we were talking about when we were talking about the two different streams, is essentially you're trying to renegotiate reality back into the process. So the things that you find that are genuine risks and genuine costs, trying to call these out to kind of inform the project, to kind of negotiate with the dreamers, to come to kind of like some kind of agreement, some kind of way of seeing what's going on, which is nearer reality. Now, there's some other things that you can do. I didn't really kind of get that this. I've been reading a book about poker betting, and I didn't really understand that a lot of the kind of bets that poker players make off when they're not playing poker, when they're kind of betting on other things, that kind of, apparently this is something a lot of poker players do. If they think their bet is going south, they sometimes try and offset that bet by making another bet. So basically kind of like reducing their risk by kind of hedging in different ways. Now, this is something that you absolutely can do using those agile methods that kind of you probably got pasted on your project as a way of making sure that it succeeded. And so some of the things that agile does that really, really do, like, essentially you make smaller bets that kind of pay off, and by doing that you can reduce the risk of the whole project. So this is user research, so kind of really understanding what the potential value to users might be. And one of the things that can happen there is you can discover value. You can find things out that this project will be valuable for that maybe were not even imagined in the initial description. So you can find new ways that this thing can be useful that weren't even talked about in the original idea. The other thing that you can do is you can actually start to generate real value. So you can limit, you can actually elevate the amount of value that this project delivers by finding new value. But you can also reduce the costs and elevate the value by actually getting bits of it to work and delivering something with it. So rather than it being one whole bet where you push everything into the middle of the table in poker like you see in the movies, this is lots and lots of small bets. So if you can get a small thing working that delivers value to users and then get feedback from users about what they need next, or what would be the best bit for them next, then you can start to deliver value from this project. And by doing that, even if the whole thing doesn't really pay off in the way that it was initially expected to, then what you're doing by doing this is you're reducing the chance of it being a catastrophic failure. So I'm intrigued. Today, I think, like, I'm just going to say this out, like, I'm surprised by some of the words that have come out of my mouth. Yes, I swore, but also, like, I feel that, like, in some ways this is it sounds like an extremely cynical way of thinking about projects, but also I think it's an extremely liberating way of thinking about projects, because it's the absolute opposite of something that I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, which is seeing projects as commitments and consistency, as a challenge of keeping promises and being consistent. And essentially that's the other side of the mirror, that's the dark side of the mirror from what we've been talking about today, which is bets.